Decolonizing the Curriculum, the first ever session of the conference. We are so glad to have you all. Thank you so much for your interest and your attendance to this conference. We are so lucky and blessed to have Professor Kehinde Andrews from BCU join us here today in the first session. Just to start off with, I'm just going to give you some housekeeping rules and go through some of the rules and some of the things that we're doing. I'm going to share the screen with you, just introduction. 2 seconds. Sorry, 2 seconds. Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen with you. We're just going to go through the introduction. Sorry, it seems like my sharing has failed. Okay, it seems like I can't share my screen with you at the moment, but I'm going to read to you some of the things that we're going to be doing today. First of all, I'm Ronke Oladele. I'm currently an international development student at the University of Birmingham. I meet along with the rest of my teammates, Jonathan Brooks, Christina Webley, Augustine Farinlola, and Sheila Ishwad. We are all students at the University of Birmingham, and we are all organizing this conference. We've been putting this conference together since January, and with everything going on, it's obviously had to move online. We are saying that this is going to be, please note that this is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded and put on YouTube later on, please switch off your cameras. If you want your name to be anonymous, please use a nickname. The recording of this webinar, excluding all the Q&A, all the questions, will be uploaded onto YouTube. So yeah, please post questions in the chat during the Q&A session, which will take place after the webinar. Additionally, we have some resources that we are going to share, both educational and also for mental health, concerning everything that's been going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. And yeah, we're just going to be addressing some systemic racism issues and injustices right now. So we're going to share some mental health resources, and we are going to also share some knowledge and some things that will help you expand your knowledge about the whole issue and everything going on in the UK in particular. So look out for that in the group, in the chat as well, because we're sharing quite a lot of links and resources to that. So yeah, that's all for me for now. So to all who everyone's here for, Kehinde, you can take over.
Greetings, everybody. I hope everybody is good. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to everybody who's turned up as well. This is not, I haven't quite got used to talking to myself in my front room yet, but it's actually good as well in some ways because you can reach out to a broader audience. So bear with me. I will do my best. So I'm going to talk for not too long, like half an hour probably. Allow you to have a bit more questions because I would like some questions, and really talk about what is Black Studies and really this concept of Black Studies and the science of liberation, which is controversial in some ways because of the use of the term science. What does it mean to be a science? Why use science? But what I'd say is focus on the liberation aspect, not the science aspect, but I will get to that. So I do have some slides to share, which is basically a lot of pictures, just to kind of give you, so you can follow the thread of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share this. Hopefully this works. Okay. Yes, so here we go. So the slide is, as I said, it's science liberation. If you are interested in some of the stuff, we do post a bit on social media. Hashtag Black Studies BCU. You can follow all the different things we've been doing over the years. I guess it's years now as well. I will talk a little bit about Black Studies and some of the things that we're doing and the plans that we have. But first, I want to go back and talk about the context that what brings Black Studies into being. So we have Black Studies. We have an undergraduate degree in Black Studies. We're also going to have an undergraduate degree in Black Studies in criminal justice, which is sort of an oxymoron, given there is no such thing as criminal justice in this country. But we really wanted to have a degree that looked at some of what some of the worst areas of inequality, and criminal justice, the criminal and justice system is one of those areas. We're also going to have a master's from next year as well. And so, but this is all new, right? Like 2017, we have the first Black Studies degree in Europe. But it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It comes out of a collection of movements, mostly led by students actually, and also staff, that preceded this, right? So the context that gets you Black Studies eventually really is the movement to what other people call, not we usually call, decolonize the university, right? So this is from 2015, we had Why is My Curriculum White? You had Roads Must Fall, which is really powerful, that started off in South Africa and then spread to Oxford. And now we have this idea about decolonizing the curriculum. And really what's happened is, in the last, let's say 7 years probably, there's been a movement of students who have basically said, we've come into the university, we don't like what we see, it's Eurocentric, it's narrow, it's huge problems with the way that the university deals with students generally. So if you look at things like the attainment gap, where there's a massive attainment gap for if you're white or if you're non-white. And actually not in some ways, in every way, the inequalities in the university system are actually worse than inequalities in the school system. And academics like to complain about the schools, but actually if you look at the university inequalities, it's actually worse. So if you look at the school inequalities, there is no white, non-white disparity. Some groups do well, better, some groups don't do. It's a lot more complicated. University, it's not complicated. Even groups that do better in school still have an ethnic penalty when they come into universities. But there's something about the university that is producing this really deep and entrenched racial inequality. And so what we've had over the last seven or so years is students really mobilizing around this. And one of the reasons that has been over the last few years is, widening participation is still relatively new, and it's not as long as we thought, right? So if you go back to the 60s, universities were just a place for rich white men. Only 5% of the population went to university. Really, really elite, really, really narrow spaces of exclusion. But it's only really in the 90s that the universities start to open up, where we have widening participation. So my university, Birmingham City University, is one of the post-92 universities. And even the way, if you look at the way they widen participation, it tells you about the inherent racism in the system. So you have all these elite white institutions, and they say, well, look, we need to get poor people into university. We need to get more women into university. We need to get minorities into universities. So what do? Do we invite them into our elite universities? Nah, let's not do that. Let's create a whole new raft of universities and we'll put them in there, right? So you see that the way that white participation has happened from its very conception has really embedded racial inequality further. I love my university. I was actually joking before I started this. I would never work at the University of Birmingham. I have a job there. I don't need that drama in my life and that deeply racist institution in my life. But the reality is, if you go to a university like Birmingham City University, or if you work in a university like Birmingham City University, you're at a disadvantage, not getting paid as much, and your job prospects are lower for many reasons. So but if you look at where the diversity is in higher education, it's almost exclusively in the new universities, right? And one of the things I always get people to look at is look at the league tables for university. Top of the league, like there's literally this racial hierarchy in the league tables. Any university that has, like our university has about 50% ethnic minorities. My faculty is 65% ethnic minority students. But any university that has a similar demographic to my university is automatically going to be in the bottom half of the league table because of the way the league tables are calculated. Two of the key metrics here are the degrees, percentage of students who get good degrees. As we just said, if you're a minority, you're far less likely to get a good degree. And that even in a university like mine, which has more black staff, has a black studies degree, isn't as overtly racist as somewhere like UOB. I did my PhD at UOB, so I have some first-hand experience. But yeah, the inequalities across the board, right? So if you have 50% of your students are far less likely to get good degrees, and then the other key metric for measuring universities is employability, jobs after degrees. And all the stats will tell you, if you're a minority, even if you go to a good university, you're still significantly less likely to get a job and even more less likely to get a graduate job. So if 50% of your student body is disadvantaged in those two stats, you literally can't, but there is a ceiling to how high you can go up the league table. It's a racialized league table, right? And I actually know of university, I won't name the university, because I know of a university in a similar position to ours in terms of demographic, whose basic response to this problem was to say, well, let's try to deter minority students from coming. And actually, if you want to move up the league table, that's what you should do. Just get more white students because you're going to go up the league table. It's so like racism is literally embedded in the fabric of the market of the system. So in some ways, if you think about, we like to think about a progress narrative. Things have changed. White participation has made it better. It's actually made it, I don't say worse, but it's just as bad. It's a new set of problems that's come with white participation and marketization. And so now you have students who are in the universities, and I think part of the reason you have the student mobilizations, if you look at where those mobilizations were, Oxford would be a perfect example, the elite universities really only opened up a bit more to minority students relatively recently. Right? So I went to University of Bath, or Bath, I think I'm supposed to say, if I tell you when it was, you know how old I am, but let's just say it was a while ago. I went to University of Bath a while ago. I was one of 6 African Caribbean students in the whole intake for that year. Like 6 in the whole intake. Any subject, any course, there was me and 5 other people. In my degree, which is psychology, I was the only black person in any year or any postgraduate. So literally the only black person studying psychology at the time in the university, right? So it's only been relatively recently that those numbers have changed a little bit. So if you go to Bath now, you will find there's a few more minority students, UOB, a few more minority students. And what's happened is as they've come in, they're looking around at these places. So if you come to my uni, it doesn't look, it's not as obvious, the problem, because like I said, there's more minority ethnic staff, even before we had black studies. There's loads of black and minority ethnic students. So you don't necessarily see the problem of racism very clearly. You don't have dead white men all over the walls. You know, it's a new institution. So you could come in and you could miss the problem. If you go to somewhere like Oxford, you go to Oxford, you can't miss the problem. It's so obvious. Every time I go to Oxford, I'm just shocked at how obvious it is. I mean, it is literally just dead white men everywhere. Like, you can't ignore the racism. And so you've got students coming into these spaces, and they're just like, nah, this can't be, right? We have to be something different. No, there's no staff here, there's no representation here. these are really, really, really violent spaces. Again, my university is just as bad on the structural side, but on the overt racist, that kind of day-to-day vice, it is a safer space. Safer, not safe, right? So that's why you have this explosion of movements over the last 10 years, because you've got students. If you look at the places where it does tend to be in the elite institutions. Leeds is quite important for why is my curriculum why. UCL was actually where why is my curriculum why started. That's not a coincidence, right? You're having this here in UOB. I think most of the time, I do this kind of talk all the time. Almost exclusively, it's elite universities that I'm going to talk at, because this is where you can see the problem the most clearly. So what's happened then over the last several years is there's been lots of mobilizations about this, and it's come on the agenda. Other thing that's happened why it's on the agenda, which is a sort of good side of the market, not a really good side, but a sort of good side, because the students matter and students are seen. I don't want to say the students matter. It's the money the students bring that matters, rather than the students that matter themselves. So if I'm in Birmingham City University and if I'm the dean or whatever, if I'm the VC, and I have 50% minority students, and I don't take the let's try and get rid of our minority students approach, well, I have to kind of do something, right? If I want to go up the league tables, I kind of have to address the issue. I don't really have a choice anymore. And so part of this is about it's being forced on the agenda because of these things like the league tables, because of like things like the opportunity, and students have places they can go now to get their consumer rights, which is terrible. In some ways, it's terrible. Like, I'm making a terrible argument for marketization, but that's actually why it's on that's in some ways why it's on the agenda as well. Universities kind of have to have some kind of response. Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of the background. So Black Studies isn't separate to that. It's definitely part of that. And why our university has been committed. I say committed, has been sort of committed to the work that we're doing. So Black Studies starts in the States, and it's very similar. So I started with that story in the UK, but actually in the States is exactly the same, really. The difference in the States is that the universities open up earlier, so why-in participation happens much earlier. We look at this week has been a really powerful week, and what am I doing? Notifications about Manchester United. So now you know which football team I support. Not related to the curriculum. So this week's been a important week in terms of racism. It's an opportunity to kind of have some discussions that maybe we should have been having before. And one of the things that's come up a lot, because protests around the police killings in America, and how useful the American situation is to understanding the British situation. In many ways, America's just ahead of us in terms of the racial problems, because of the differences in the way that our oppression works. So if you look at America, America has slavery in America. It means that after emancipation, you have millions of African Americans in the nation state. So you're going to have to deal with that problem. You have to deal with that problem, the issue. So since 1865, and even before then, there's having these conversations. America's had to have the race conversation. They have a choice, because you have millions of people. The difference here is that slavery was as offshore, if you like. It was in the Caribbean. It was thousands of miles away. So when emancipation happens, you don't have that conversation. Never happens in the UK, because my family's still in the Caribbean, right? And it's only since post Windrush that there's been big populations. So there's been Black people on the island for centuries, but there hasn't been enough of us until the last 50 years, probably, really, in terms of numbers. And in terms of education, so the young people don't start coming until mid-60s. So we're only in like the second generation, really, of large amounts of minority students going through university. So you wouldn't expect this conversation to happen here just because of that. In America, it's different. 100 and X years, and that conversation happens a lot earlier. It starts happening in the 60s, and it's the same thing what I talked about that happened here. Open the campuses, Black students go into the university, and another difference here would be, this conversation doesn't happen at HBCU, so America has a historically black colleges and universities because of segregation. So it's not like black people weren't going to university, they were just going to separate universities. But this conversation about black studies doesn't emerge in HBCUs. Black studies emerges when black students start going to white universities. And when they go to white universities, what do they find? They find no black staff. They find Eurocentric curriculum. In the 60s, they defined kind of overt teaching of racism in the classroom. And that's what sparks the black studies movement, where the students are saying, this can't happen, we need something else. And it's exactly the same thing that happened here. It just happened earlier because of the demographic issue and the way that colonialism works in the United States, and the UK. So in the States, one of the big differences though in the States is probably because it's earlier and because the forms of racism at this time are, far more overt, right? I mean, it's only 65 that you have race relations legislation in America. So prior to that, it would have been perfectly legal to discriminate. And in the UK as well, people often forget this, but before 1965, perfectly legal to discriminate in terms of employment, in terms of housing, in terms of everything. Like saying I don't like black people was fine. That was perfectly fine. So when African American students are going into these colleges, they're facing a level of violence and resistance that we're not now. That's probably the big difference. Like racism's not any better, it just looks a bit different, right? So if you are interested in black studies, a really interesting piece by Nathaniel Hare, and it's called The Battle for Black Studies. And Black Studies was an actual battle. So this is San Francisco State College in '69, the first Black Studies program in the US. And they had to have a 5-month-long strike of students, of teachers, of other faculty to get Black Studies. We're saying that we have to have them. Black Studies essentially is two things. One is the study of the contributions, experiences, and perspectives of African Americans. And the other thing is connected to liberations. What do we do with that? How do we fix the issues which we find ourselves in? But it took a 5-month-long strike at this uni college to get Black Studies on the table. And if you look across the board, it was these kind of really overt struggles to get Black Studies. This is an iconic picture from Cornell University, and it's Willard Straight Hall. And the students occupied, Willard Straight Hall was like a student accommodation, it's like an accommodation block, and the students occupied it. And they didn't go in with arms, they only armed themselves after they had threats from the KKK. And that was the level of violence we're talking about here. And then so they had to arm themselves, and they occupied the building for a couple of days and eventually came out, and they had this iconic picture of them coming out armed to the teeth, right? To get Black Studies in the US literally was a battle. And every uni has this kind of story about the struggle to get Black Studies on campus. The Black Campus Movement, they call it. Importantly, this wasn't a struggle that was separate from other struggles, right? So Black Studies doesn't just emerge out of nowhere. It's not just Black students saying, look, we want to be taught differently. There's whole histories of struggle movements, the women's liberation movement, the Black women's liberation movement in particular. Really important to say, well, actually, we demand something different. And if you look at how Black Studies gets onto the university campuses, it is these movements, the Black Panther Party, Black feminist organizations, who are struggling and supporting the students in what they do. I mean, if you even think about if I'm going to university and I'm going to critique and say the university is not teaching me properly, then I must have a body of knowledge which I'm saying should be taught in the university. This is one of the things I stress from the absolute top of this, is that Black Studies has never been and should never be thought of as an academic discipline. Black Studies is not created by the university. It's just in the university. The intellectual traditions of Black Studies go far, 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 far back outside the university, right? So when the students are saying we demand something different, they're saying we demand this knowledge that we've been learning about, talking about in our communities from our perspective, which has already existed, and we now we insist that this be brought into campus. And that's what really marks out Black Studies as being different, I think. I think this is a really important thing, because if you look at what's happened to Black Studies since that moment in the 60s, it has become professionalized. it has lost some of that urgency, it has lost some of those links. In fact, there's a special issue of the Journal of what's it called? The Black Scholar, special issue of the Black Scholar, the oldest Black Studies journal in the States, coming out this year. I believe it's coming out because 50 years of Black Studies was last year, and they've called it "What Happened to Black Studies." It's essentially like, what happened? What do we do? Like, we had this kind of moment where it's really political. It's really the Black Power movement. It's saying, look, let's not just change. Black Studies was never about saying let's get Black staff. Just about saying let's get Black staff and students on campus. It was about saying let's change what the university actually does. The way the university functions is problematic and has to change. And a really central part of that was what Hare called the community component. So he said, look, what's the fundamental problem with the university is that it's separate. It's based on this kind of Western idea of rationality, that thought and action are two different things, and that you can think separately, and if you just have this space away from everybody else to think and sit above society, then you can theorize and come up with the knowledge that the world needs, effectively, right? Happens also, it tends to be white men who do this, and this is where you get this kind of really racial superiority entrenched in how we think about things, right? So Black Studies is saying you need to end that. It can't just be you get Black people into the ivory tower to do the same thing. Actually, we have to bring the community into the university, and these kind of insurgent knowledges, this knowledge that we produced outside the university, needs to be brought into the university, and that's a very different thing to just diversifying what the university is. But 50 years on, it is an interesting question to think, how much have we done this? Patricia Hill Collins talks about this, and she says in Black Feminist Thought, she talks about the ethic of personal accountability, and this is this kind of Black feminist idea that what gives us credibility as academics, well, not as academics, what gives us credibility as intellectuals, because these are two different things, intellectual and academic, very, very different things. So what gives us credibility as intellectuals with our communities is our ethic of personal accountability. Do when we speak about things, write about things, talk about things, do people think that we're genuinely interested, connected in it, part of it, relate to it, or not? The simple test. And if they don't think so, they ain't gonna listen to you. Simple as that. They won't listen to you at all. But if they do, and the only way to prove that is to be part of the struggle, part of the movement, to create knowledge which is really useful to the people. That's the only way to do this. There's no other test to that. And so in order to do that, Black feminism is probably the best example of an academic Black studies approach that kind of uses that liberatory idea of Black studies from it, that still has it in it, really in its conception. Because really what it's saying is, look, our audience isn't the university, our credibility doesn't come from the university, our credibility and our audience is from the communities, and particularly from Black women. And if we're not talking to that constituency, then we may as well stop talking. So this is something we think about, to what extent do we meet that criteria in our academic production. In the UK as well, so we've really tried to stick to this as a tradition. And I say that very clearly when people ask about, what's the history of Black studies, the legacy of Black studies. It isn't academic, like it isn't, and that's fine. That's a good thing, right? In the UK, we also have our own intellectual tradition of producing knowledge. This is a picture from 1979, I believe, Africa Liberation Day in Handsworth in Birmingham, which is not too far from the University of Birmingham campus. So Africa Liberation Day, the first one was 77 in the UK. And this brought together, thousands of people would come out into Handsworth Park and would, celebrate. This is a picture from Vanley Burke, who actually now works at Birmingham City University in a visiting professor capacity, and kind of captured the moment here. And I use this picture because it's a really good picture just to capture the scale of the community at that time. But it's also, this doesn't just happen. You can't just organize an event with thousands of people unless there's really deeply rooted connections into the community. And one of the things which was really powerful, the British Black Power movement, and there was a British Black Power movement, there still is a British Black Power movement, a very strong British Black Power movement that just is almost erased entirely from history, what its probably main contribution was in the field of education, and not schooling. Because schooling is one thing, education is something else. Education is a completely different framework, way of understanding, way of thinking, way of going through the world. So my first book that I wrote about, my PhD, was about the Black supplementary school movement in the UK. And the Black supplementary school movement was a response to racism in the schools. And it was this is like a perfect Black power response to racism in the schools. You know, our families are from the Caribbean. My dad's from the Caribbean, my grandma's from the Caribbean, and brought the kids over, assuming the schools would be a great place, right? British, the mother country, British schools are great. It's going to be wonderful. Actually found out very quickly in the mid-60s that the schools were terrible, deeply racist. I mean, at one point in Haringey in London, 70% of African Caribbean boys were being deemed educationally subnormal, which would now say special educational needs. I mean, the schools they're terrible now, but back then they were overtly horrendous. So there was the approach of let's try and fix the schools. There's lots and lots of mobilization to say let's fix the schools. But there was another approach, the more Black power approach, which was let's just do it ourselves. Why would you rely on the schools to teach your kids education that they don't know? Teachers don't know what they're going to do, right? So we take it on ourselves and create our own school. And this was in people's front rooms, in community organizations. So the picture you're looking at, the African Liberation Day celebrations organized by the Pan-African Congress movement that has a base in African Caribbean self-help organization in Handsworth. And that was also the base for one of these Saturday schools, the second Saturday school in the UK in '67. And it's started by a group of young people who just said, we're going to educate our own kids. And there's a 50, 60-year history of Saturday schools who just said, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to have to teach ourselves, do ourselves. The other thing you have with the Black Power movement in Britain is bookshops, community bookshops, which used to be a huge thing. And fortunately now, because of money, Amazon probably as well, we lost a lot of the bookshops. So there's a bookshop in Birmingham, Harriet Tubman Bookshop, which I actually used to be volunteered to work in as a young person by my father. That's now gone, unfortunately, because of debts. But we had these spaces, and New Beacon Books is still in London if anybody is in London and wants to visit. We had these spaces where you could go in, you could learn, you could get the different curriculum. And the book thing is really important. It's not like now where you have Amazon and you can go and get any book you want. It just comes to you as 50, like not even that long ago, but certainly 60s, 70s. People had to go and find these books. So my dad talks about, just going to America, finding this one guy, going up 8 flights of stairs in New York to get these books and bring them back into the UK. It was a proper like guerrilla activity to go and find all these different books and bring them into the UK. And I think I have the next picture. I'm going to come back to that one. And so this is a picture I took because I did a radio documentary with Radio 4 about the British Black Panthers, who were part of the a part of the British Black Power movement. And one of the really important things they did was bookshops. And this is a picture of just a selection of the books that I grew up with, right? So we're thinking about the stuff that I currently know and talk about and talking to you about now. I didn't learn any of that in university or school. I learned this from these books. Like these books were literally the very first part of my education. And then Saturday schools, and then the bookshop, and then the organized, and then the movement, and then I got my education. And actually, they're behind me. Actually, most of these books are actually behind me. I've got them here as the basis of the books. But that kind of community, really grassroots education is where Black Studies comes from in the UK. This is the knowledge that's in these books and other books and other things as well that we teach. That's its history and its connection. It is an academic. It really is Saturday school movement, bookshop movement, Black Power movement in the UK. And there is no Black Power movement in the UK without the Black Power movements more broadly. Right, so the international dimension, if you look through these books, you'll see very clearly you have America, you have the Caribbean, you have various African countries, Nkrumahs in here. There's this kind of, from its basis, a global idea of understanding and a different way of doing things. So what we're essentially doing is we are bringing in the knowledge, different knowledge, community knowledge into the university space. Yeah, I'm going to skip back to Haiti in a second. And that's important because one of the things that we always stress then is that even though we're bringing the work into the university, and this is where the science of liberation thing comes from, one of the fundamental principles of the work that we're doing is that liberatory knowledge, or the science of liberation, which is what it wasn't Joe, it was Robert Staples called Black Studies, can't come from the university. Like, it's literally impossible, right? Because of the location of the, because of what the university is, because of how the university works, it's not going to be the place that produces liberatory knowledge in itself, right? Liberatory knowledge comes from the struggles, the process, the activities that in the service of liberation. That's the only way to produce liberatory knowledge, the science of liberation. And in doing this, then we have to recognize that our intellectuals, our intellectual history is unlikely to be academics, right? It's more likely to be people like Malcolm X or Claudia Jones. I have a perfect picture because you got both of them in the picture, right? They say that one of the things that we do with the university is really, 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 really elite, right? And I've had this conversation many times with people where they're saying, well, like, yeah, like who are the real intellectuals? You can't find any black intellectuals pre, 60s when there's nobody in the university. Forget that. When we think about intellectuals, we have to think differently. Malcolm X for me is probably the most important intellectual of the 20th century, full stop. I don't say that like just about activism. That is about how you understand the relations of society and race. If you want to hear, if you want to understand what's happening today with the protests, police violence, there is literally nobody better to go to than Malcolm X. He never finished school, never really wrote a book himself personally, but intellectually, conceptually is beyond anybody I've ever come across, right? Similarly, if you have Claudia Jones, right? Claudia Jones, hugely influential in the development of Black Marxist tradition, right? When we think about, I'm quite critical of Marxism a lot of the time, but in terms of understanding, how society functions, how it works, what happened, where we go as well. Claudia Jones, again, equally hugely important. With one of the things we forget about the things like Carnival, right? Carnival is cancelled this year because of COVID. But we tend to kind of trivialize Carnival because it's dancing and it's culture, etc., etc. What are the roots of Carnival? The roots of Carnival more broadly are in the experience of slavery, and there's a reason why Rio, Jamaica, even New Orleans, Mardi Gras started out as a very similar carnival to the carnivals that we have in the Caribbean and in Latin America. There's a reason why Carnival is the way of celebrating it. Because when the enslaved were given the opportunity to celebrate, they chose a form of celebration that was African, that connected them back to the African. It's not coincidental, right? That is a political act. And the Notting Hill Carnival in particular is also a political act. Where did it come from? It came from, the roots of it are 1958, Notting Hill race riots. And a race riot, again, for context for today, definition of a race riot should be when white people get mad and start attacking black people. That's a race riot. We have lots of history of race riots in this country. And that's what happened in 58. But the police, as the police like to do, arrested lots of black people in these disturbances. And it was Claudia Jones, an activist like Claudia Jones, who organized a series of cultural events to raise money for the people, black people caught up by the police. And also Claudia Jones says to wash the communities, wash the taste of the disturbances out of the communities mouth. And it was these cultural events which eventually led into Notting Hill Carnival. The Notting Hill Carnival, deeply political, right? And comes out of the work of people like Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones also important, and Malcolm is actually holding the obituary of Claudia Jones in the West Indian Gazette, which was the first black-owned newspaper in the UK. Started by Claudia Jones and people around Claudia Jones. And that legacy of that knowledge is really important. How do we produce our own knowledge? And newspapers like the West Indian Gazette, the Abeng later on, the Voice at one point, were places where you could have this different form of knowledge, where people would read them and exchange them. And that's the community knowledge that we're talking about. It's a completely, a different framework that's necessary if we want meaningful change. Which is why I had Haiti, a picture of Haiti. Haiti is important for lots and lots of reasons. This is the start of the Haitian Revolution. Bois Caiman ceremony, Cecile Fatiman and Boukman Dotti are leading this ceremony. And this is a ceremony that sparks the Haitian Revolution. in 1793. And it's important for lots of reasons, but the importance in terms of black studies, why it's important, is because of the different framework of knowledge. One of the reasons why Haiti has its revolution is because the system of slavery on Haiti was brutal. I mean, all slavery is brutal, right? It's not like there's any better versions of slavery. But the French basically took the because it was cheaper to buy more Africans than it was to look after Africans so they would have longer life, right? So they basically just worked you to death and then got more people in, right? And because of that, it meant that about 60%, almost 2/3 of the enslaved on Haiti at the start of the rebellion were from Africa, African-born. And they African-born had indigenous knowledge systems. This is a Voodoo ceremony, right? It's a different way of thinking about the world. And they came together on this island and said, no, we're not going to do this. Like, this slavery is not going to happen. We haven't been, we're not going to accept this system of slavery. One of the reasons why one of the main reasons the British abolished the slave trade in 1807, don't abolish slavery until 1838, is because in 1804, the Haitian Revolution is successful and they become terrified of Africans. They're like, we don't want any more Africans. What we want are people born into slavery, who we've indoctrinated into slavery, and who will more easily accept their conditions. Now, if people born into slavery did not accept their conditions, right? They still resisted. But there was something very, 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 very powerful about having an alternative framework, an alternative understanding of the world, which really did lead to the Haitian Revolution, right? It probably is true to some extent that it needed people who were African, who were born outside of the system, in order to understand, in order to really overthrow it in that sense. And also, one of the things that the Haitians had, the people enslaved in Haiti, was the skills. Actually, technically, one of the underplayed parts of why the Haitian Revolution was successful was that there was a civil war in what we now think of the Congo, and a lot of the people who were sold into slavery were actually warriors, guerrilla warfare. So you actually had the skill of revolution, right? So that idea of mentality and of seeing ourselves as not being part of this, really important in terms of liberation and where we're going. I'm not sure why my screen is messing up. All right, anyway, this is a sign because I stopped talking. All right, so I'm gonna skip, and I do want to end because I want to give a lot of time for questions. So one of the things we're thinking about with Black Studies then is we're taking this kind of insurgent knowledge, and we're saying that the point of Black Studies isn't to decolonize the curriculum. It isn't to decolonize the university. Look, the university is what it is. It's an ivory tower. It's racist. I ain't gonna change it. Like I tell you right now, I can't change it. It just is what it is. And I could tell you lots of stories about how terrible and hard it is to be within the institution. I won't, because I'm being positive, right? But so for us, when we say we are really trying to do is to colonize the university, right? To understand it just is what it is, but understand that what the university is a space of privilege, it's a space of resources. What other job could I possibly have where I could have all the freedom to do most of the things that I do, right? It really doesn't exist, right? So we do have an opportunity in these spaces to do things somewhat differently. And the key here is, how do we mobilize the resources that we have in the university? That's where the idea of the science of liberation comes from. So accept the framework, because we can't change it, but what can we do within that framework to do other things? Is it possible to leech the resources, to put them into service of liberation? But that's only possible if we're doing this with really organic connection to things which are happening outside, right? It can't be a stuck in the university thing. It can't be a struggle where we're saying, let's just try and get more Black academics. That's nice, but it's not going to solve the problem. It's actually about doing things differently, different kinds of research methodologies, different kinds of questions, different kinds of work, just completely different. So what we're essentially trying to do is to colonize the university and to use it for purposes which go against what it's there for. Difficult though, because of marketization, believe me, not the most easy thing in the current climate we're in. But I want to skip this because I want to end on this. So thinking about, do I even need this? Yeah, think about this then. So this is the tweet that when I got made professor. So when we first start, my letter of professorship. One says, "Dear Kai," didn't even use my full name, which again, whatever, I'm not on protocol, but it is a little bit shady. But if you look at who signed the letter, It's Professor Philip Plowden. It's my dean, Professor Keith Horton, and it is Marco Dwyer, who's the Director of Human Services. I won't give you three guesses because I don't think you need three guesses. What do they all have in common? They're all white men, right, who know nothing about Black studies. So you think about my title of Professor of Black Studies, it's been given to me by an institution and by a collection of people who know nothing about Black studies, right? Who actually, if I follow my own critique, would probably be a massive part of the problem, right, in the first place. So when we're taking things, and I celebrate being professor because I get paid more. It's great for me. But what does that mean for us? What is that? What is this a mark that actually means we made any progress? And I'd say 100% no, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not, right? The marks of recognition that we have to really take on board is that ethic of personal accountability. Who's the audience for the work that we have? Is it the institution, or is it those people outside the institution? It's a really important question. Like I said, I like getting paid more, but this isn't a mark of progress, right? The mark of progress is when we can use the work to do something different. But again, more positive, because I do want to end positively. This is going to sound not positive, but it really is positive, I promise. So, but when you have these titles, though, it does give you some more freedom. The freedom it gives you is the status you can subvert the status that you have effectively. So this is a picture. This is where I'm going to end on this. This is a picture of in slavery times. What they would have is they would have some of the enslaved who they would give the Bible and they'd send them around to different parts, different plantations, in order to spread the word of God, right? And the purpose of this was to pacify the enslaved. That was a point. Give you the Bible, you share a bit of the Bible, and you go around and talk to the different enslaved. That was the purpose, right? Now, one of those preachers was a person called Nat Turner. If you know anything about Nat Turner, Nat Turner started the slave rebellion in America, right? Because of the status he was given, he was allowed to go around, but he was the only one allowed to read. He was allowed to go down to different plantations. He was given the freedom to do that because of the status that the system gave him to do that, and used that status to foment the slave rebellion. This is how we have to think about ourselves. I get this position as professor. It gives me a status. I can do certain things I couldn't do otherwise. I can either do those things to further oppress and to continue the oppression of the university, or I can use that status to do something else, right? To bring in that insurgent knowledge and to bring in the science of liberation. That's the challenge for us. And that really is what we're trying to do with Black Studies. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Yeah, can people, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to start typing, and I will read out the questions. So we'll just wait a few minutes, and anyone who has any questions can type, and then yeah. Okay, just gonna wait so much. So thank you so much. That was really informative. I really enjoyed that. I'm pretty sure everyone did as well.
No worries, happy to do it.
Okay. Okay, so this is from Professor Fiona Kamari Campbell, and it says, wonder if you could talk about the relationship between Black studies and Asian studies and organizing.
Yeah, so there used to be a Black and Asian studies network, group in the UK, and no, it's really so one of the things. So there's kind of two parts of Black studies, which ties really directly into Asian studies. And if you look in America as well, where you have Black studies and you have Chicano studies, you have Third World studies, a big part of it is to decenter Europe. So actually, the Eurocentric approach is really, 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 really problematic. And there's these different ways to understand the world, and we have to engage in different ways to understand the world, right? So Black studies takes a kind of very strong African diaspora. Asian studies takes a different center. These different centers are really, really, really important to build the whole, right? So there should be an organic link across to say, actually, no, we need to have a different way of understanding things, and we can draw on the different perspectives. In terms of organizing, in terms of organizing in the university is one thing, and organizing outside. So one of the key ways of, it's in the global term often called Afro-Asian solidarity, Black and Brown solidarity. The way to have that solidarity really is around organizing, right? Organizing around issues in the university, organizing around issues in the community, taking the opportunity to organize around the similar issues which affect us as well. And there's a long history in the UK and outside of doing that. And there's really a long history within Black studies of doing that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Another question from Ursula says, are Black studies offered anywhere else in the UK other than BCU?
No. So you do have African studies and you do have Caribbean studies. They are not Black studies. I would say that, like, I mean, if they were Black studies, we wouldn't need Black studies. We would start and go and do Caribbean studies. So in many ways, African studies and Caribbean studies are colonial, really have really deep colonial legacies. Yeah, I'm not going to make any comments about African studies at UOB. I don't want to get in trouble. But yeah, they have deeply colonial legacies. And so the word always saying, look, Black studies, there's two elements, African diaspora, and really importantly, you come and study Black studies, you will go out into the community and apply. You literally cannot pass the course without having a real organic connection to communities outside. This is the only place you can. Because it really isn't Black. It's not history. It's not like, so there's an MA in Black British history, which is good. It's not a criticism. It's just not Black study.
All right, thank you. So from Olivia Barnett, she says, what about funding for research? How to use recognition? How to use the recognition and value systems of getting uni funding?
Uni funding in terms of research funding. Was it a research funding question or student?
I'm not sure. I'm guessing yes, because she did write research for research ETC. Yeah.
You know, it's definitely tricky because we've seen there's just hard to get research funding for stuff on race generally. Specifically, if you're saying, well, actually, we're doing Black studies, and it doesn't have I mean, even now, there's a lot of smearing from the establishment academics about Black studies, so it's not straightforward. However, it's not impossible. So we've had research monies for different, so we've got a project running now with the Heritage Lottery Fund around decolonizing museum practice. We've got research money from the AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council. And actually, I think that's probably a tack that we've taken, is to take the history approach to getting funding. Because you can make this case, it's history is good. You have to play, the truth is you have to play the game of the funders, but there is a way you can play the game of the funders. I got my PhD on Black radicalism funded by basically pretending I was going to do a study of the deficiencies of Black boys. And they gave me the money, but I did something else, right? So you just have to learn to play the game of the system.
Yeah. So from Pete Collins, it says, what do you think are the best strategies to create space within these marketized spaces to colonize with different knowledge forms?
So, you know, I mean, so part of me, on the one hand, we couldn't have got Black studies as a degree without marketization. And I tell you, it's 100% true. Before students paid £9,000 a year for fees, there was a very strong student cap on numbers. And there's no way, if I go to my dean and say, look, I want to do a Black studies degree, but I want to take some students from law, they laugh in my face. They say, no way, go away, right? But because students now pay £9,000, cap comes off. If I can get some students to come and do it, the university's not going to say no, right? So it's playing those logics of it, right? There are opportunities, I mean, it sounds really cynical, but you just have to play those up. This is an opportunity. You have to sell the thing you want to do in terms that the university will think it's good for them to do it, or they will not do it. As simple as that. And that can be money, or it can be reputation. And actually, one of the things now that was opened up now is reputation. Universities really want a better reputation about race, so you can sell it on that.
Yeah, thank you. Alison says, brilliant. Do you have advice for those trying to make at least some difference in elite universities?
Yeah, like I said, like if you're in an elite university, you have even more surveillance over your campus, but also you have more resources, right? Like one of the things in our part of the sector is resources is not that great, right? But actually in the elite spaces, there are more resources to do things. And what I would say is, one of the ways that we have been successful is that, you know, Black studies started off as research, and they started off 2013. We had like a big conference like this in Britain, and there's international and there's global links to it. So I'm not relying on the stuff internal to the university. That would be no way. But we now have this global organization of people who can connect and we can do things and we can pull things together. So it really is about building networks outside of the individual institution.
Thank you. Someone, Salima, says, why do you think there is a lack of Black representation in academia, especially in the field of social science? I'm guessing you kind of already answered this, but yeah.
It's racism, isn't it? I mean, let's just be honest. Like, they don't, like, even now, like I said, even now, like, if you listen to the where did we get the research funding we've had, it's history, almost exclusively history. We try and go into social sciences, it's almost like a guaranteed no. There's so much resistance to these ideas, and I mean, even so, if you look at one of the papers, if I get a chance to write it, I will write it. It's counting the Black sociologists in the UK. So I started counting, and I don't know everybody, but I think I know most people. I estimate there's 15 people, Black people, employed in a sociology job in the UK. 15 in the whole entire of the UK, and 5 of them work at Birmingham City University, right? Like, it is insane how white social science is. You go to most, like actually UOB, go to UOB, College of Social Sciences, and find me one Black permanent member of staff. You can't do it, believe me. It doesn't exist. That's how bad it is. And they don't value our knowledge. They don't value our practice and output. I actually think that if I applied for a job at University of Birmingham, which I was overqualified for, I probably wouldn't get it because it's that bad. Like, that's how bad it is. It's really is difficult. And I'm not sure. And I don't know, I'm a bit pessimistic about it because it's just so bad. I've seen it again and again and again.
Okay, thank you. From Pip Lehan, it says, what is the first step to decolonizing the curriculum, would you say? Apologies for the basic question, but I feel like the work being done on my course at the moment is too much like tokenism.
You really need to change the staff. Like, the staff is so important at universities. The staff, we have so much flexibility about what gets taught. And if you don't have staff that are committed, it's not going to work. So you really, one of the things that students, or I should say the students who are pushing this agenda of decolonize the curriculum, get different staff. Ensure that the university is hiring different people is the only way to really change the curriculum.